Should we be talking more about Jahan Dotson, one of the most dynamic wide receivers in this year's draft? Just seems to not be getting enough coverage. So let's talk about him, and we'll also take a look at our top 25 day 2 prospects for the New Orleans Saints. We get all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire. Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday for Locked On Saints. For those of you watching on YouTube, you're seeing the turtleneck today, celebrating that New Orleans Pelicans play-in win last night. Make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans. Shout out to the guys, Jake Madison, Antonio Daniels, everybody. Very excited about the Pelicans heading to Los Angeles to take on the Los Angeles Clippers on Friday. But anyway, this is the Saints podcast, but I needed to give a shout out to the Pelicans because the city is invigorated right now with some love for basketball, hashtag a basketball city. All right, so I want to talk a little bit, speaking of invigorating, about one of the most invigorating prospects in the NFL draft that I feel like isn't really getting enough coverage. And as we kick off our sort of look at the top 25 day 2 prospects, which we're going to get to in 2 parts here in a little bit, I want to highlight my number 1 day 2 prospect. Hell, he might not even make it to day 2, but if he does, he'd be right up at the top of the list for me. Wide receiver from Penn State, Jahan Dotson. One of the most dynamic players after the catch, one of the most dynamic players in terms of route running ability, one of the most dynamic players in terms of you look at his size versus the way that he plays above the rim and has that sort of my ball mentality. Jahan Dotson checks a ton of boxes. The boxes that he doesn't check are going to fall to size, right? About 5'10", 170, 180 pounds. That's going to be something that might hold him back a little bit. It might be one of the reasons that, of course, he is considered one of those back of the first round, top of the second round wide receivers in this year's draft. When you look at some of the other guys that are up there, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, they have undeniable ability, right? Chris Olave is still my top wide receiver in this class for the New Orleans Saints, but you also have guys like, Jamison Williams, who has this elite speed, Treylon Burks, who has incredible size, right? Christian Watson, who's got great size as well, although he'll be a day 2 guy because of the small school situation. So when you look at Jahan Dotson, what is it that's holding him back? It's literally just the size. You look at everything else that he does extremely well, and there are a lot of traits that you would love to be able to work with and line up opposite Michael Thomas. Remember, you're looking for a complementary piece here, right? Split in for Michael Thomas, ex-receiver. You're looking for a flanker on the other side, or maybe even somebody that can play in the slot. And Jahan Dotson does both those. He has experience inside and out. He has experience playing that flanker role to where he's off the line of scrimmage by a couple of yards, which keeps him from getting pressed, which is really helpful with his size. His combine measurements versus his pro day measurements, 5'10", 178 at the combine, 5'10", 181 at his pro day. So I don't think he's too far outside, and we know that the Saints are knocking down some of their like size prototype, size thresholds, things like that. So that could work for him as a wide receiver. But he's got, good hands, 9.5 inch hands. He was targeted a total of 138 times in 2021, only had 2 drops. And he has a total of 10 drops over his career, which is a little hefty. But when you look at the numbers, 2019, where he was targeted 27 times, he had 4 drops. But then after that, it came down every year, even though the targets and the catches were going up. And that's exactly what you want to see. You want to see those 2 things trend in opposite directions. You want to see the drops come down and the catches go up. And that's what you see with Jahan Dotson. 27-4 in 2019. His catches went up to 52 in 2020, but drops came down to 3. And then 91 catches in 2021 on those 138 targets with 2 drops. Over the course of his career, 183 catches, 2,757 yards, a 15.1 yard per catch average there, and 25 touchdowns. I tell you that not because I enjoy box score scouting, but because I want to highlight those 25 touchdowns. 12 of them came in 2021. So remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about Justin Ross, the wide receiver from Clemson, who had this phenomenal true freshman year. And then due to injuries, quarterback changes, any number of things that you could point out, his production dropped over the course of his college career. Jahan Dotson went the complete opposite way and did exactly what it is that you want to see from him. He about doubled every year up until his final year, where he topped over 1,000 yards receiving, 203 yards in 2018, to 488 yards in 2019, 884 yards in 2020, and then he got up to 1,182 yards in 2021. And on top of that, of those 25 touchdown catches, 10 of them were beyond 40 yards or were for more than 40 receiving yards. So he could be one of those guys that's a deep threat for you. He's not going to break a bunch of tackles with the ball in his hand, but he will run away from everybody, and he will make it hard for everybody to be able to catch him. And the thing that I like, too, about Jahan Dotson is that even though he is only 5'10", I say as a 5'10" person, 180 some odd pounds, 170 some odd pounds, I say as somebody who probably weighs like 90 pounds wet. But even though he's only that size, he's really effective over the middle of the field as well, making a lot of contested catches, making some tough catches in traffic over the middle of the field as well. Those qualities that the Saints really like in Tre'Quan Smith, Jahan Dotson has as well, but probably with even better ability and a much higher ceiling than what we have been able to see from Tre'Quan Smith so far. So I'm not necessarily comparing them one-to-one, but one of the things that the Saints do like about Tre'Quan Smith is his physicality. Jahan Dotson, with all the other things that we've talked about that make him a dynamic, really explosive weapon as a wide receiver, also has those traits. So I think that that's something that really should probably be holding Jahan Dotson up, maybe in higher regard than he really has been so far. I think that the thing that's going to kind of knock him back is not only his size, but his ability to be able to manage physicality at the NFL level. You're talking about big corners. You've got J.C. Horn in this division. You've got Carlton Davis in this division. You've got whoever the Atlanta Falcons are going to put on the field in this division. There are some really, really physical corners. I'm kidding, A.J. Terrell. But A.J. Terrell is a really, really physical corner as well. So are you going to be able to deal with that? Because you're not just going to have that guy on Michael Thomas all the time, because Michael Thomas is going to move inside. He's going to be run from the slot. They're going to use him from a bunch of different places along the wide receiver alignment. And because of that, you're going to draw some cornerback one coverage in this division every now and then. That's just what it's going to be. So can you produce against them? But it's super hard to watch this guy and think that he's not going to be able to take advantage of one-on-one matchups. His double moves are super crisp. He sells leverage or takes advantage of leverage by selling those double moves so well. He's got really good tracking ability. He is somebody that can actually out-physical somebody at the catch point. He'll struggle a little bit at the line of scrimmage, but at the catch point, his mentality is 100% that ball belongs to me and you are simply in my way. And these are things that you love to see from a wide receiver. And he adds that 4.43 speed, a 36-inch vertical jump. Oh, a broad jump at 36 inches would be terrible. 36-inch vertical jump, and then a 121-inch broad jump. So explosive as well in terms of what he's able to produce relative to his size, and then also be able to pack that 4.43 speed. It's not 4.36, it's not 4.39, it's not the 4.27 that we almost thought that Chris Olave ran, but 4.43, you'll still absolutely take it because you don't have that kind of speed on this New Orleans Saints team outside of Deontay Hardy. He's the only one. And speaking of Deontay Hardy, if you're concerned a little bit, you want to see him get more involved in the offense, but because of that, you want to kind of take him back on special teams a bit. Jahan Dotson, very experienced punt returner as well. So I love this guy. In fact, we have our ultimate mock draft coming up next week, and I picked at 16 and 19. I didn't move, but I almost traded back because I was so comfortable about the idea of trading back and landing Jahan Dotson in the 20s and adding some extra draft capital. But that wouldn't have been any fun because I wouldn't have been able to show you what I was going to do with the draft capital after that, since we were only doing the first round. So we'll get to that ultimate mock draft later on. Don't worry, you're going to be happy with what I did. I do promise you that. But this is very, very exciting. This is a very exciting prospect and somebody I've been meaning to talk about for quite a while. To be 5'10", to have a 75-inch wingspan and 9.5-inch hands. I mean, this guy is a reliable target. He can make some of those physical catches. He can stretch the field. He can produce after the catch. Kind of does a little bit of everything. That's exactly what the New Orleans Saints are in need of. And you might be able to land him at the top of day 2. He might be somebody that you roll the dice on at the back end of round 1 if the Saints were to trade back, which is a possibility that we'll explore more tomorrow, since the Saints haven't traded back since 2007. So what would it look like if they did? We'll talk about that on Friday's episode. But today, I want to get to our top 25 day 2 prospects, led off by wide receiver Jahan Dotson. Let's figure out who is after that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for everything that you need, sports betting and sports information as well. Hope you were able to pick up a little bit of cash and put in a little bit of action on that Pelicans win up against the San Antonio Spurs before they now head on Friday over to the West Coast to take on the Los Angeles Clippers, beat LA. You know what we're saying. So maybe you want to go ahead and get in on that action as well. BetOnline is the place to do it. You can find all the latest that you need in sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs as the play-in continues. BetOnline is your continued source for everything that you need, sports wagering information from live betting to those NBA playoffs to baseball, which is now, I was going to say kicked off, but I guess is now pitched off, esports, and even more that you can get in on over at BetOnline. Just check out the website or use your mobile device today so you can learn more about all the trends and action over at betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints with the turtleneck swag. Shout out to those New Orleans Pelicans, but also shout out to our incredible lineup of NFL draft coverage that we have coming up. I've told you for a little while, the Locked On NFL YouTube page, we're going to be live all 3 days of the NFL draft, covering it from beginning to end, but we also have the ultimate mock draft coming up, which is going to be on the Locked On NFL podcast, as well as the ultimate mock draft, Ultimate NFL Mock Draft 2022 podcast feed as well. So you could just search that wherever it is that you get your podcast so that you have the dates for the live draft. We're going to be live starting, of course, Thursday, April 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And then we're going to keep rolling right along 6:30 Eastern time for the Friday. And then at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time come the Saturday, the big long day there. And then Ultimate Mock Draft premieres April 18th. Run through the end of the week, and then we'll get to the end of that the following Monday, so April 18th through the 22nd. So make sure you go and subscribe to the Locked On NFL YouTube page, subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast, and make sure that you search Ultimate Mock Draft 2022 on your favorite podcast provider as well. All right, day 2, top 25 players. New Orleans Saints absolutely have the ability to land a starter in day 2. And I mean round 2 and round 3. They could walk away with a pair of them. Now, the Saints have those 3 top 50 selections, but they've got 4 top 100 selections. So we're going to focus on round 3 here as well, as the Saints have picked 98 in the 3rd round, pick 49 in the 2nd round. Assuming that they don't trade up or move around from those, they would still end up with 2 selections in the top 100 beyond the 1st round. So we already talked about Jahan Dotson, wide receiver out of Penn State. He's my number 1 prospect in day 2. We highlighted him, so we'll continue to move here. Jalen Pitre, the safety out of Baylor. He's the other safety for me, right? You look at Jaquan Brisker, who I had as a top 25 overall player. Jalen Pitre from Baylor, not far behind him as another guy that I think would be a fantastic fit for the New Orleans Saints, especially in replacing Malcolm Jenkins' role in particular. Then to round out the top 5, Travis Jones, defensive tackle out of UConn. Tyler Smith, offensive tackle / offensive lineman, we'll call him, out of Tulsa. And then Bernard Raymond, offensive tackle out of Central Michigan. I think the outside of safety in day 2, the trenches are the other place to continue to invest in. We're going to dig really, really deep next week, draft week, into the New Orleans Saints and what they've done. We're going to look at everything from conferences that they've drafted from to the way that they've invested in premier, non-premier positions, things like that. We're going to break a ton of that down next week leading up to the first day of the NFL draft. And so really paying attention to the trenches makes sense because, spoiler alert, the New Orleans Saints invest in the trenches a ton, and I know you know that. So I've got 3 of those guys in the top 5 that I think can help to shore up that defensive line, give you another defensive pass rusher on the interior, but then also be options for you in terms of versatile offensive linemen, in terms of Tyler Smith, or somebody that is a born and bred offensive tackle like Bernard Raymond. And I know Bernard Raymond struggled at the Senior Bowl, but you can't look at one game, and in particular, one situation where you're handed a playbook one day and then you're on the field 5 days later playing in a game and hold that against everything else that's on tape, which is actually pretty good from Bernard Raymond. And not much different than guys like Trevor Penning or some of the other guys that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Okay, rounding out the top 10, wide receiver George Pickens out of Georgia. Wide receiver Sky Moore. We've also got Kaiir Elam, the cornerback out of Florida. Lewis Seen, the safety out of Georgia. And then Kenneth Walker, the third, the running back out of Michigan State. So we get our first running back here from the entire list. We had no running backs in the first one. Kenneth Walker is my sort of running back 1, but he's not the best fit for the New Orleans Saints. We're going to talk about that next week in terms of what the best fit for the New Orleans Saints is. And it's a guy over on the West Coast that I think is really, really phenomenal. But George Pickens, Sky Moore, Kaiir Elam, Lewisine, Kenneth Walker. So the person that I really want to highlight here is George Pickens, right? George Pickens is a guy that if he hadn't dealt with the injuries that he dealt with later on in his career, he would be a number one, not a number one. He'd be a round one selection. He'd be a top 25 overall guy. But because of the fact that he basically missed the entire 2021 season, showed back up just in time to help Georgia win a national championship, which you love to see, it knocks his draft stock a little bit. But I talked to him at the combine, and I think he's phenomenal. Think about him as the offensive version of CJ Gardner-Johnson. I mean, this guy is an absolute trash talker. He gets into people's heads. He believes that anybody that lines up in front of him, he is better than that person. He is better than anybody that lines up opposite him. And you love that attitude from a wide receiver. He's a little bit more of a split end in his build, but he has the ability to play from the slot. He's played flanker. He's a fantastic blocker that plays into his physicality as well as all of that like mental game that he plays. So I really, really like George Pickens. I like everything that he brings to you. He is a potential bona fide wide receiver 1 that could potentially, if you get to a point to where, all right, it's time to pay George Pickens because he's put together a ton of production in that offense, your usual wide receiver 1 might be on the way out or might have his contract on his way ending. The Saints could actually be in that situation. But I love what George Pickens brings to his game. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he was a first round selection, maybe a guy that goes late to, let's say, the Green Bay Packers, right? In late in the first round or something like that. I would not be surprised to see that. Sky Moore is somebody that gives you a lot of the same stuff that Jahan Dotson gives you, but just, not as big as hands, not as sure a catcher, but still a good hands catcher, brings a lot to you as well. And the Saints have actually had him in for a top 30 visit. Now, remember, the Saints oftentimes draft players, even in the first round, that they've never visited with, right? So don't take the top 30 visits as the sort of narrow list of players the Saints might draft. In fact, for the most part, they draft guys that they've never even talked to. Marcus Davenport was one of those. Peyton Turner was one of those. So there's a lot of those guys that the Saints end up drafting that they just spend a little bit of time with at the Senior Bowl or something like that. And then that's enough for them. Okay. Getting right outside the top 10 here. We get a couple more kind of trenches players here, but we're also going to start folding in some quarterbacks. Now, you're going to not hear some names, right? You're not going to hear Malik Willis. You're not going to hear Kenny Pickett. They also weren't in my top 25 overall list. That doesn't mean that they are not top 50 players to me. It's just that I'm talking about top 25 players that I think are going to be available in day 2. And even though Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett and some of these other, Desmond Ridder aren't top 25 overall players to me, that doesn't mean that they won't get drafted in the first round because they are quarterbacks. So I assume that they will be drafted in the first round. So we're going to talk about some quarterbacks, but there are going to be some names missing. It's not because I'm pushing them all the way down the list. It's just that they don't fit the criteria of top 25 day 2 available players as I expect day 2 to look. All right, DeMarvin Leal, the defensive tackle. Drake Jackson, the phenomenal edge rusher that no one is talking about out of USC. We've got Sam Howell, the quarterback out of UNC. David Ojabo out of Michigan. His injury knocks him down a little bit. Man, I wish he wouldn't have performed in his pro day because he would be another, top edge rusher that would push some of these other offensive tackles and wide receivers down. And then speaking of wide receiver, Khalil Shakir, the wide receiver out of Boise State, who is just one of those versatile slot guys that could be a really interesting investment in day 2 if you go and grab that flanker, that deep threat in day 1. The guy that I want to highlight here is, of course, Sam Howell. Listen, I'm not against the New Orleans Saints drafting a quarterback. That would be foolish, right? You invest over and over and over again in your quarterback room and at the most important position on the field. That's just what teams should be doing. The Saints didn't do that for a long time with Drew Brees, and they probably should have, if we're being honest. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see the Saints grab a quarterback. What I am against is packaging 16 and 19 to move up into the top 5 for a quarterback, because I just don't see why you do that, right? You can walk away with 3 starters, 3 top 25 players, do that, and then see if you can add a quarterback in the midst of that. That's fine for me. Stay put and then land a quarterback if you feel like the value is there. So Sam Howell is the top guy in terms of the 2 that are really remaining on the board for me. Not the 2, but the 2 that are going to be on this list. He's the top guy for me out of the top 5. Let's say it that way. Okay. Let's go next to rounding out the top 20, and then we're going to get to specifically kind of third round guys to wrap up the show. Troy Anderson, the really, really athletic linebacker. Matt Corral, not far behind when it comes to Sam Howell and those quarterbacks for me. Perrion Winfrey, the defensive tackle. Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver out of Southern Alabama. And then Christian Watson, wide receiver out of North Dakota State University. Now listen, you land Jalen Tolbert or you land Christian Watson, I'm very happy. about that. I have them both down a little bit just because of competition level. Are they going to be able to translate to the NFL? Christian Watson's just one of those guys to where you almost feel like there's too much good about him, right? You look at the speed, you look at the size, you look at the athleticism, you look at his ability to change direction, his ability to catch passes, all of that, right? To be a secure ball guy, like ball catching guy, like all those things. I wonder at some point, like, okay, where is the, if I go out on a first date and I feel like everything is going too well, I'm going to wait for something to go wrong. I'm a cynical person like that. And so I'm wondering, what's wrong with Christian Watson? There's something here. And so I'm the biggest concern for me is just translation to the next level. I feel similarly to Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert, I feel like, has a little bit less in his tool set for than Christian Watson, but fits the role of what the New Orleans Saints are looking for, maybe just a slight little bitty bit better. And of course, you got to have, pretty good looks at both of these guys at the Senior Bowl. So really they're interchangeable in terms of which one is over the other. But I'm so concerned with how good everything is about Christian Watson, which may make me a fool, but hey, let me be cautious. The team doesn't have to be cautious, but I can be. Troy Anderson is somebody that I just really, really think is one of those guys that could potentially like come into the NFL and just be a better pro than he was in college, right? He could just be one of those guys. And the thing that I really enjoy about him is that his athleticism is just off the charts. And so if you're going to end up in a situation to where you don't have, let's say, Quan Alexander coming back, but you want to have another one of those really, really athletic linebackers, listen to this. 6'3", 243 pounds, really good build, really good height. Everything works right there really well. 77 inch wingspan, 77 and 3/8 inch wingspan. So he's long. 4.42 speed, 36 inch vertical jump, 128 inch broad jump. He's explosive. He's athletic. He can make plays underneath. And he has the ability and the speed to be able to carry some of those athletic tight ends up the seam as well. So I really, really, really like Troy Anderson, somebody to definitely watch. Let me make sure I get his college in here. Montana State. So forgive me for not knowing that one off the top of my head. All right. So that wraps up our look at most of the day two prospects, a lot of round two prospects. Now from 21 to 25, the last 5 here, we want to talk about round 3 prospects that you should know, including a name that maybe shouldn't be on this list and really should be a round 1 guy, but a lot of people are still sleeping on him. It's the small school prospect stuff again. We'll talk about it as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to those round 3 specific prospects, I want to tell you about Shady Rays, an independent sunglasses company that's giving you everything that you love about those $200 pair of sunglasses for a fraction of the price. You know, those ones that you break the bank for and then break, those ones that you lose a little bit of cash for and then lose. You don't have to worry about that with Shady Rays. You get the same high-end finishes. You get the same really sturdy, well-constructed frames, the polarized lenses, but also this insane protection program. So when you do break those glasses, so when you do lose those glasses, they'll go ahead and make sure that they give you lost and broken protection on every pair. They're going to send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what it is that happened. And if you happen to get them and not like them, you pay absolutely nothing. So go and check them out. It is Shady Rays. They also make sure that they donate 10 meals to help fight hunger in America when you shop at Shady Rays. And exclusively for our listeners here on the Locked On Podcast Network, head over to shadyrays.com and use the promo code Locked On so you can get 50% off of 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's promo code Locked On for the best deal of the season. Make sure you get that 50% off of 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 5-star reviews, including my own. I love these things. And tell you what I also love. Rock Auto. RockAuto.com, the place that you need to go to make sure that you get everything that you need for your car, truck, your vehicle. I think you can probably even get stuff for like your moped if you drive a moped. It doesn't matter. They cover you for everything, whether it's a Dodge or a Daewoo, a Ford or a Fiat. Rocked On. I love them that much that I'm just like putting them together with our own network. Rock Auto has you covered. So go check them out. You just pick, it's super easy. You pick the year, the make, the model, let them know exactly what part, piece, or accessory you're looking for. And you get a ton of options for that part. And you're paying 30, 50, sometimes 70% less than what you're going to pay over at those brick and mortar chain stores as well. So go and check them out, rockauto.com. Don't forget to let them know that Locked On sent you. But right in Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need over at rockauto.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with 5 round 3 day 2 prospects. So we're still focused on day 2 here, but we're really focusing in a little bit on round 3 prospects that could be meaningful players for the New Orleans Saints. And I went a little bit of a different direction here. I have a couple of DBs here because one of them should be a round 1 guy, but he's not. So here's my bottom 5 of our top 25 in day 2, but these are specific to round 3. Vi Mathis, the defensive tackle out of Alabama. Nick Cross, that safety out of Maryland that we talked about as a sleeper just a couple of days ago. Tariq Woolen, the cornerback out of University of Texas San Antonio, same school and program as Marcus Davenport. Joshua Williams, the cornerback out of Fayetteville State, HBCU, stand up. And then I thought I was going to be an absolute genius by putting this guy in my top 25 of day 2. And then I listened to the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, and they talked about him for like a full segment today, and now I feel like an idiot. But I'm going to bring him up anyway. Abraham Lucas, the right tackle out of Washington State. Ross, why would you be talking about a right tackle? Okay, let's remember all the way back when, as we were having conversations about what the Saints should do when it comes to the tackle situation with Teron Armstead having signed away, now being a Miami Dolphin. One of the things that we talked about was potentially moving Ryan Ramczyk over to left tackle. Maybe James Hurst can play right tackle. Maybe James Hurst can play left tackle. One of the things that we discussed was the possibility of drafting a right tackle, but moving Ryan Ramczyk to left tackle and then allowing James Hurst to continue to be your sixth man. Let me tell you some things that I like about old Abraham Lucas here. So he's Dane Brugler's offensive tackle 8. This is not the player that I think is going to be a first-round pick, by the way. We'll get to that, or could be a first-round pick. We'll get to that quickly. I just want to talk about how smart I felt and how I don't feel smart about it anymore. 6'6", 315 pounds, boy, big. He big, but you know what? He be moving. 4'9", comes in at a sub 4'5", 29-inch vertical jump at his pro day, 9'5" in terms of his broad jump. Had some really nice 3-cone, 7.25, which is good for his size at 315 pounds, 6'6". He's good at everything. That's really what it is. It's not that he's great. It's not that he's elite. It's not that he's any of that. He is good at everything. Played 42 games of a possible, 48, 49 games or so. Missed some time in 2020, but played all right tackle. First team all Pac-12. Opted out of the bowl game in 2021 to get ready for the NFL draft. Great frame. Pretty good athleticism, especially for his size. Relative to what he does, he's probably going to be a round 2 guy. He's definitely going to be a day 2 guy, but he's just one of those guys that no one's really talking about. So I wanted to show him some shine. If you want to hear more about him, Josh, you over at Locked On NFL Draft, they talked about him a bit today. But the guy that's in my round 3 kind of list here that I think could very well be a round 1 selection if it wasn't for the small school is Tariq Woolen. Out of UTSA, 6'4", 205-pound redshirt senior who ran a 4.26 40, jumped 42 inches in the air, and then also put it down. 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump as well. So explosive, fast, big. I mean big. 6'4", 205-pound cornerback that's able to move like that. He's got 5 tackles for loss in his career, 2 interceptions, 11 passes defended, 6 in 2021, 5 in 2020, which are really the only 2 years that he played. So he doesn't have a lot of tread on the tire either. 62 career tackles. He is a phenom. I mean, this guy at this size should not be moving like this. He's kind of like the defensive version of this year's Alec Pierce and Christian Watson, who just should not be moving the way that they do at the size that they are. He's going to need some time, right? It's going to be a technique thing. He's coming from a small school. He's coming from UTSA, but we know the Saints like their small school guys, especially 3rd, 4th round. If he's really going to fall that far down into day 2, gives you a real opportunity there. But he is really, really good, both in coverage and in run support as well. He's a good tackler. He has just like he's a rare package is what he is. I mean, to be that size and to move the way that he moves, I just think that there's a lot to like about him. So I put him up there as a guy that's like, look, the Saints may not have a glaring need at cornerback. Paulson Adebo did exactly what we thought he would do. Remember, I hyped him up big time last year. I felt so scared when the Saints actually drafted him because I was like, if this guy sucks, no one's going to trust me ever again. And he didn't. He played extremely well. He kept a veteran in the slot as a backup in the slot in Bradley Roby. And so you're in pretty good hands in terms of the cornerback there. But if he's there and if he's the highest valued player on your board, then grab him. I mean, these are rare traits. You don't really get a lot of guys like this in the NFL. And so if you get a chance to take a swing at him, especially in the third round, take a swing at him. So those are the guys that I'm really highlighting for the third round. I think that Phi Mathis is just a fantastic leader. And again, as I always say, if you can get an Alabama defensive tackle in the third round, you draft an Alabama defensive tackle in the third round. Joshua Williams out of Fayetteville State, another one of those guys that has like that rare package of stuff, but is coming from a small school, so he's going to fall down. And then Nick Cross, we talked about before as being one of those safeties that can kind of do a little bit of everything and is just a really physical guy, a little reckless, but physical, right? And so he gives you a lot of that sort of ignition that you're looking for at the safety position. So if you can't land a Jaquan Briscoe, if you can't land a Jalen Pitre, then all of a sudden Nick Cross out of Maryland makes a ton of sense. And there's the Maryland connection. Remember, the Saints' secondary assistant on the defensive side is Corey Robinson, who used to be the DB coach for Maryland. And so the Maryland connection is absolutely something to watch, just like we always talk about the Cody Burns Tennessee connection to Velus Jones Jr., the wide receiver who could be a third or fourth round selection as well, who almost made this top 5 list. He'd probably be number 6 in terms of those offensive tackles, in terms of that top 5 day 3, round 3 projection that I'm looking at here. So Velus Jones Jr. getting the honorable mention today, because I always promise you a little bit of lanyap. So there's your little bit of lanyap along with this turtleneck. All right, I'm getting hot. We got to wrap this up. We are all done here for today's episode. Coming back tomorrow, we're going to talk about the opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to trade back. Everybody's talking about what Mickey Loomis said in terms of getting 3 top 20 or 25 players in the draft, but he also talked about the opportunity to be able to trade back and maximize, pick up some additional selections as well. What could that look like? Could the New Orleans Saints end up with 4 top 50 selections? Could they end up with 5 top 100 selections and be able to walk away with a few more of those top 20 to 25 prospects? We'll break it all down in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day, and of course, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Hear more about Abraham Lucas and some other sleepers as well. So you can go and check that out wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Thanks again, y'all, for making me a part of your day. For everything you need around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.